this group. It does say in the first part of this is the largest group of people. They kind of identify with the exhausted group. So let's hear this. There's a great story that is going to be told here, and I think it's good for us to hear it. So I hope this works. Can y'all see that okay? Turn the light out. That's better.
Well, the exhausted are the ones who are being drained of hope. And Russell has described something of what that feels like. Now, most of the exhausted majority haven't gotten exhausted because they've been engaged in national or even local politics and have lost. The reason why most of the exhausted majority are getting exhausted is not by what they're doing, but rather by what they're hearing. It's by the stories that they're consuming about politics. We perhaps have tasted a little bit of that bitterness, a little bit of that fight and exhaustion, really in our relationships with family and friends. And we know how exhausting that feels and how it does make us feel like we're losing hope. Sometimes that experience happens in face-to-face relationships with family and friends, and sometimes that happens on social media. Social media especially exhausts us. It exhausts us because social media is built on categorizing us into various us versus thems. That's how social media works. It groups us into us and thems, and then it will tee up content that makes us afraid of the them. That's how it gets clicks. Fear and anxiety are incredibly powerful motivators, and so social media knows that and tees up the latest story of how awful them is and what the latest thing that them is doing to get us. As we bathe ourselves in these kinds of us versus them stories through social media, we get exhausted, we lose hope. You see, when we consume stories on social media, we're not actually in relationship. We're not actually in relationship with the people those stories are about. It's a false, faux relationship. The only stories that are actually real stories are stories of real relationships with people in our lives. So the Jesus practices for his how of politics involve stopping some things and starting some things. Jesus invites us to generate our own stories, stories of relationship especially with those who may differ from us politically. How can we actually conduct relationships that actually build hope in all of us? Here's a story that showcases how this happens.
I'm Nancy French, and I am married to someone you've already heard from in this course, David French. I'm a best-selling author and an investigative journalist. Being married to David is sometimes difficult when I see the way that the public perceives him, especially in social media.
I'm Kathy Kattenberg. I think I joined Twitter around 2007. I'm a political addict. I started reading National Review. David French was an editor and a writer on National Review at that time, had been for years. And I started reading David and disagreeing with him vehemently on everything. David and I disagree on abortion. That's one issue that David and I will never agree on. I'm sure of it, we will never agree on that. Well, being me, I started telling him exactly what I think. I would tweet it. Do you want women to die? Women have a right to control their own bodies. The woman is more important than the fetus. All things like that.
He's criticized sometimes for legitimate reasons, for disagreements on issues, but most of the time it is personal and it is awful.
I would get angry, and then I would respond even more angrily the next time.
In 2016, I wrote an article in the Washington Post that detailed my story of sexual abuse. I was abused by someone who was my vacation Bible school teacher. So I wrote an article. I wanted to publish it anonymously, but they don't do that at the Washington Post. And so I thought about it, decided to go ahead and publish under my name. I'd never talked about it before. The article went super viral. I got all kinds of social media response. I got emails from probably hundreds of people who told me stories of their own sexual abuse. Additionally, a lot of people criticized me. They were terribly uncharitable, and it hurt my feelings a great deal because a lot of those people were from my quote-unquote tribe. And so I decided in that moment that if anyone showed me kindness on social media, I was just going to follow them. Previously, I only followed people that I sort of ideologically aligned with, but at this point, I was like, forget it, I'm going to go with kindness. And so I started following a bunch of people. One of the people that showed me kindness was named Kathy Kattenberg.
I always knew there was a person named Nancy French, and she was married to David French. I had looked at her profile, but I didn't know anything about her. Nancy shared a very personal and very painful story of her own. She herself had had tragedy in her life, and I was just filled with compassion for her. So I wrote to her and I said something along the lines of, I don't agree with your husband on things, but I have so much respect for you and for your courage. I think it's enormously brave of you to have written an article for the Washington Post so everybody knows what happened to you.
I clicked follow, and every time I logged into Twitter, I saw her post, and she was not a huge fan of David. I just sort of scrolled past it and scrolled past it and scrolled past it. For about 4 months, every time I checked Twitter, I would see Kathy insulting David. So COVID hits, and I see a message from Kathy posted publicly, and she said, I will never eat again. I'm stuck in this apartment. I cannot get groceries because of the COVID overload on the grocery delivery system. And she said, I just can't get any food. I don't think I'll ever get food. I didn't know it at the time, but Kathy was disabled and she couldn't leave her house. So Kathy posts that she's food insecure, and she was so against David. She disliked him so much. However, I sent her a direct message and I said, hi, I'm Nancy French. I'm David French's wife. I saw your post. What can I do to help?
She contacted me on Twitter, on direct message, and she offered to help.
My phone rings and it's Kathy, and she has this beautiful New York accent, and I sound like I fell off a turnip truck, and we laughed at that. And she was asking me, like, why did you reach out? And I said, this is a treacherous time. What can we do to help?
It was just astonishing to hear her voice on the phone. And we worked on finding a grocery that would deliver the food.
And that whole process was pretty funny because I had to talk to Kathy on the phone, and it was stuff like she wanted diced tomatoes, she wanted bananas, beef, just basic stuff. But when you talk to somebody about their food needs, it's very intimate. I placed the orders, nothing happened. The next day I called her back. Hey, Kathy, I'm still working on it. We talked every day. At one point I was like, Kathy, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I cannot get you food. And I said, the only thing I think we can do at this moment is to pray. And she said, okay, go ahead and pray. Well, I do not pray randomly with strangers over the phone, let alone praying with someone who I sort of considered hated us so much. So Kathy Kattenberg and I, together on the phone, prayed that God would send her food. And it was very awkward, and we laughed.
I can't believe that any human being would do something like that, so personally kind as that.
We talked about a lot of topics. The most hot button topic was abortion. We're very pro-life. She's had multiple abortions. And so she told me that story, and when we had that conversation, it was so moving to me because her story was devastating. And so instead of telling her that I disagreed with abortion, I just said I'm very sorry for the circumstances that led up to that. And so I just showed her compassion. We worked and we worked, and finally Kathy calls me and she's just crying. She was like, you're not gonna believe it, I have 2 pounds of meat and 4 bananas. 30 minutes later, the phone rings again. My other orders had also come through. So now she had 6 pounds of meat, she had like 25 bananas, we had probably 30 cans of diced tomato. I mean, she was just like drowning in food.
For her to take a person that she didn't trust, because I was always attacking her husband, and to call me and arrange to get me food. It was huge. I mean, I couldn't believe it, and from that point on, we were friends.
I wanted to go meet Kathy in person because we had bonded. I got invited to perform at a storytelling event at Lincoln Center, which was a huge honor for me. And I thought maybe since it was close to where Kathy lived, she might want to go.
I went to see Nancy.
I was backstage. I had to give David Kathy's cell phone number. So when she arrived, David extends his arm and he escorts her into Lincoln Center. I knew somewhere that David and Kathy were sitting together listening to my story, and that cracked me up so much. It made the whole night just sort of more magical.
He was so kind. And it was the first time that I could really see graphically that a person can think very differently from me politically and be kind. And David is very, very kind. He doesn't have a mean bone in his body. Oh my God!
Hey there! It's so good to see you.
Oh my God!
How are you doing?
I'm fine.
It's so good to see you.
And so we've kept in touch for 2 years, and we've gotten closer and closer and closer.
Nancy is the best friend that I have ever had in my life. She's not just my best friend now. I have never had a friend like Nancy before in my life.
You've heard a story of a relationship, rather than being born on social media, actually taking place with each other in real life. Now take some time to reflect on this story. How did this story make you feel?
So how did it make you feel? Let me see if I can stop it real quick. How did this story make you feel?
Very warm-hearted,
Yeah. Warm-hearted,
hopeful.
hopeful. Yeah. What else?
Power of prayer.
Power of prayer. Yeah.
A Christ-like compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I guess it would have been pretty easy for her to have just said, "This woman's mean to my husband." So, yeah, but I tried to look up some of the tweets. You know, they went back and forth, and I couldn't find them. I think they're probably taking them down now. But anyway, it was a pretty rough relationship. He would post how he felt about a political issue, and then she would just blast him. And what's interesting about some of the blasting that happens on social media, it's not just they disagree. They start attacking you personally, and they say things that are, you know, they call you names, things that aren't true about you. They say that's on social media, and there's no truth meter out there that says this is true or this is not true. It's just out there. I told you, I think last week, I did a little more research about this after party series and looked at some of the reviews of the after party, and you know what? Christians were attacking these three men personally. They're not necessarily just saying they disagree with them. They do say that too, but then they start calling them a liar. You know, this one I listened to, he just blatantly said, this guy, he played a video clip, and he made a statement in the video clip, and he said, that's just a lie. That didn't happen. And that's not the way it is. When you think about that chart, and I don't know if you remember it or not, but you've got the four quadrants. You've got the disciples that were striving to be disciples of Jesus, and then you got the exhausted, which we're talking about. We've got the combatants in the top left that are really low. They just really fight. They think you got to fight to get your beliefs out there. And then you got the cynics, which we haven't really talked about. As I made the point last week, all four of these quadrants are really Christians, right? They're all Christians. And there's another group of people that's not even on that chart. They're a bigger group of people. And when they look in and they see what we're doing to each other, how do you think they feel? Is that attractive to them? Do they want to be a part of that? No, I would say not. When they look at us blasting each other on social media or wherever we do it, that's not what's attractive, and that's not what she did, right? I mean, I don't know this video. That lady is probably not a Christian. I don't know that. It didn't really say, but what attracted her and brought her into a relationship and gave her hope for the future was Christian love that they expressed to her, even though it didn't start that way. You know, it was her criticizing her husband. So I think we have to think about that. The other thing that I was thinking about, and I like charts, I like graphics and Excel and all that stuff, so forgive me for this just a minute, but if you think about those 4 quadrants, there's probably a diamond or a star right there in the middle that should be there. What do you think should go in that star that binds all of those groups together? If you had to pick one word, what would be in it? Love would be a good word to go in there. Anybody else?
Christ.
Jesus Christ. I thought of both of those. He's the tie that binds all the groups together, no matter where you're at today or in the future or where you've been in the past. It's Christ that is in the middle, and he's pulling us all to that top right corner to where he wants us to be. And that's where it's at. So let's finish this.
Social media is absolutely not the best way to engage with another human being. You know, when I watched the story you just saw, what it tells me is that it is possible to bridge incredibly wide gaps between people when you interact with them as human beings, when you care for them as human beings. Look, I'm not naive. I know that you can reach out to somebody and they can rebuff it. I know that you can try to heal breaches and you can fail. These are things that happen in this fallen world. But I also know that if we treat people as social media caricatures, if we view them entirely through the prism of their political point of view and ascribe all of our judgments about them based on their political point of view, we're just doing it wrong. Everybody has a story. I'm reminded, was it Chesterton who said, "Be kind, everyone faces a hard battle"? We don't know the battle that other people face. And by giving them charity, by giving them grace, we actually have an opportunity to enter into their lives. Again, nothing is guaranteed. It's a risk to reach out to somebody. But if you don't break through that social media barrier, you don't even give yourself a chance to have the kind of relationship that Nancy and Kathy have developed. I know it is incredibly easy to make judgments about people based on social media. I'm somebody who spends time on social media as part of my job. As a columnist, I'm supposed to not just write my columns, but also talk about them, promote them on social media. So I'm there a lot, and I know what it's like to be seen entirely through that prism, as if I'm nothing other than the pieces that I write or the tweets that I send. And frankly, you know, it's in many ways only a very small part of me. One thing that I've learned is that sometimes the most aggressive people online are also some of the people who are in the most pain. People who are battling the worst demons, so to speak. And they're not necessarily political. It could be personal. And a lot of people, when they're vulnerable and they're hurting, they don't actually present as vulnerable. They present as very angry. They present as somebody who's lashing out, who's short-tempered. You know, when we know someone in their personal lives, we often are much more able to give them grace because we know their backstory. We know that they're going through something difficult. But often when we confront someone on social media, we don't even wonder if there's a backstory. We don't even think for a second whether they might be going through something difficult. I get a lot of backlash backlash. People get very angry at me because of the positions that I take in politics. And I try very hard not to respond in kind because I don't know what that person is going through. I don't know their backstory. And if I use my platform, if I use my following to unleash on that individual, even if it's sort of perceived as self-defense, I could be inflicting real harm on them. And so I'm trying to be very careful about this. I'm mindful of the scripture that says, a bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Speaking of Jesus, well, as a follower of Jesus, I don't want to be a person who's breaking the bruised reeds, who's snuffing out the smoldering wicks. So, yeah, there are moments when I have to respond, maybe to clear up some falsehood, or I have to respond to clear up some mistake. But as a general matter, I try very hard not to lash back out when people lash at me, because I'm mindful of this reality. And this has been brought home to me many times over the past several years, especially as our political rhetoric has escalated. Often when I learn backstories, even backstories of people who've said vicious things about me, and my response to it changes from anger to sympathy and sometimes empathy, because I've learned that there is something else happening here. And that's why we can't accept people as sort of the two-dimensional caricature we see in a tweet or we see in a Facebook post. They're much more complicated than that. And by default, extending that kindness, extending that charity, you have a chance at achieving what Nancy and Kathy achieved by forming a real relationship.
All right. Any follow-up?
Yeah, so the idea of kindness and response is not limited to just social media. It's limited, it also extends to how we communicate with one another, either by letter, by card, by phone call, in a number of ways. When somebody in our family is hurting, has a different perspective on things, has responded in a way that we don't necessarily agree with, and so we attack. So we come with a attitude of, well, I'm doing my Christian duty because I'm trying to let them know the errors of their way, but the scriptures say, yes, correct, with love, right? With kindness. And we don't do that, and the results of that, here at Cedar Lane, has been people have actually left.
Yeah, so, I was gonna ask this question, and it sounds like Rick's already there. This doesn't just apply to politics, right? The things they're talking about. It applies to church, it applies to our relationships at work, everything like that. One of the things that we teach at my business is, for managers, if you see a change in behavior of somebody, don't just assume that they made a decision to not perform well. It is to find out what's going on in their lives, because there's probably something else back there that has caused them to change their way. One of the things, I wrote down several things he said. The most aggressive people online are some of the people in the most pain, battling the worst demons. And that doesn't necessarily mean political or personal, it could be anything. And then the other thing he said was most people, when they're vulnerable and hurting, don't present that as vulnerable. They present it as anger. And I've seen that, and I've felt it. Those are things we need to think about. If you see somebody lashing out, maybe they're lashing out at you. What could be our response to that? What should be our response? If I put something out there on, I don't remember, whatever, I express an opinion on something, online and you see it, you absolutely disagree with what I said, what should be your response?
Keep scrolling.
Keep scrolling.
My grandmother always said, if you can't be kind, be silent.
Yeah, yeah.
Ask questions. Ask questions.
Mhm.
Find out, why do you feel that way, or what's been your experience, and find out if there is kind of a backstory.
Right, right. Oh, yes,
Yeah, if it was you, I think I would just call you.
you can call me, yeah. We got a relationship, personal relationship.
You know, I think that's key, relationship, because
Yeah.
you can get personal with somebody you're not personal with.
Right.
And, you know, that's, I heard the old expression, hurt people.
Yeah. So the word I was thinking about was curious, and Ted Lasso. I don't know if you ever saw that show. I liked it. It was a lot of bad language in it, but it was a story of a coach that nobody really knew anything about, and they came up on this. They were playing darts and made a big bet on it, and he goes through this process. He's throwing the darts, and he finally said, if you can do this, then I'll make some kind of big bet on it. But anyway, and he made the point that the guy wasn't curious enough to know whether he was any good at darts, and he was not just good, he was great at darts. And he won the bet because he wasn't curious to find out about this person. And I think a lot of times when we take a position, we think we know the right answer, and somebody else that we know has a different opinion on it, we're not curious enough to even ask them why they believe that. We wouldn't even give them the chance to tell us why their difference of opinion on it. And that's a problem. To me, that's a problem. If you're not curious enough to try to find out why, then you maybe missed a point.
Maybe you should substitute the word care instead of curious.
Yeah, well, it's part of that. If you care about that person, I do. Respect is another word that I thought of. If you respect that other person enough to ask, why do you believe that? I mean, how would you do that? Anyway, I've done that before, and you walk away when you care and you've got respect for the other individual. You walk away, you learn something. Yes.
We had Randy Lowry at Wilson Avenue Summer Series one year, and he does a lot of conflict resolution work with churches. And he went into this one church, and they were having a lot of conflict with contemporary and traditional worship, and it did it bad. And he sat them down and he says, "You're going to talk to each other and ask questions. Ask them, why is that old hymn so treasured to you? And now listen." And then the others, why is this contemporary music so beautiful to you? And when they come together and listen to one another and see why, it helped. It really did.
Good. That's good. Hey, I want to change topic we got about 7 minutes left, and I just want to hit on some other things. So, finish this statement. I hope what? And I want you to give me something you hope for. And I don't want it to be anything political, so don't say that. I hope X wins or anything like that. Think about that. I hope what? What would you say?
Everyone finds the joy of gathering and encouraging one another. It's awesome.
Cool. I hope Tennessee beats LSU this afternoon.
Oh, that's political.
That's political. What else? What other hope? What would you? It's not a wrong answer. So just anything. But there's a follow-up question.
Hope Jesus comes soon.
Hope Jesus comes soon.
I hope Christians come to understand the Holy Spirit's power in their life.
love and things.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I hope I don't get fired, you know. I mean, I'm trying to make y'all lighten up just a little bit. Y'all got all serious on me, but now, the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, that faith is the substance of things hoped for. Now, the items that y'all talked about, were those sure? Are you sure of those things? They're going to happen? Because we've talked about the hope that he's talking about here is not just being this feeling of, I hope that happens. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. We want that verse there, that hope that's talking about in that verse to be, I'm sure that's going to happen. I'm sure that's going to happen. So the things that y'all talked about, were you sure about those? Are we sure Tennessee's going to win? No.
Like Jerry's message, which mountain are we at?
Sure.
We're at Zion.
Mhm.
That's hope.
Right. So this group of discouraged, exhausted, they've lost hope. Their hope has been drained because of they're looking at whatever they're looking at. If we're looking at politics and seeing that our country's going down the tube for whatever reason, or maybe they can't get food, or maybe whatever it is they've looked at and they've lost hope. Is there a problem with where their hope is being put?
I think the reason our country's going down the tube is they've become godless in a lot of ways. They're not following the right source of strength and hope.
I hope our country follows God.
Yes.
And, but that's still not an assurance. So I guess, we're done here in a couple minutes, but when we think about that word hope and when we place our hope and we get exhausted because we're looking at politics, we're looking at, family things, whatever it is you're looking at that's not Jesus is causing you to be exhausted. Because our country and any country that's out here there's going to be things that go wrong. They do things wrong sometimes. They make mistakes. They have the wrong laws or whatever. I mean, it never was right. It never has been right.
That's one of those shakeable things.
It's one of those shakeable things that Jerry talked about today. And we're not placing our hope in those things. Now,
Paul said, without God, without hope.
Without God, without hope. And I was wanting us to, that hymn, I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the well. Veil. I'll have my glasses on. Thank you. My eye doctor corrected me. I said, woo, get it out here a little bit further.
Where are your glasses?
They're right here in my pocket. I hate to wear them. But it says, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And that is the hope that will keep us from being exhausted. The hope that's looking at politics, the hope that's looking at all these other things is not the hope that's going to help us. So whenever you start feeling discouraged and, it's never going to be right, you're probably correct. It's never going to be 100% correct, but our hope is not in that.